Thanks, Daryl, very much. I caught the blogging bug, you could say, probably about 16, 17 years ago when I was doing my PhD. And I was lucky enough to be one of the contributors to what's called Mind Hacks, the Mind Hacks blog. We were one of the first kind of big popular psychology blogs. And it was so exciting, writing on there, because you soon realized, how much hunger there is among the public to hear about psychology, how much they appreciate hearing, because you all have expertise, in psychology that the public would like to hear. And if you blog, potentially, you can reach some of our most popular posts, reach hundreds of thousands. It was really, really exciting. So that's where I started blogging. Then in 2005, I set up the BPS Research Digest blog. And since then, I've also blogged for Psychology Today and Wired. So I'm a bit biased. I'm a bit of a blogging fan. But I think one of the reasons it's important to blog is that about your research is that arguably a really important part of being a scientist is sharing your research, giving away your subject. And a real challenge doing that is you might have heard of something called the curse of knowledge, which is this, we have this, all of us, this difficulty kind of overcoming our own expertise and appreciating what other people don't necessarily know what we know. And when you're a postgraduate, I heard one description of it being like the longer you study, you're learning more and more about less and less because you're becoming more and more specialized, and it's kind of increasingly hard for you to remember what it was like to be a kind of normal person who is not an expert scholar in a particular area. And so the first reason I think it's good to blog about your research, if you can, is there's really good practice at overcoming the curse of knowledge. For example, a good place to start is to try and write plain English summaries, of your research. In a way, kind of forget some of the excellent advice Patrick gave you, perhaps, in a way, because writing for the public is a very, very different challenge and skill than writing academically. And blogging will teach you that, because you need, effective writing for the public is a lot about empathy, trying to take, the non-expert's perspective, think about how to translate your research into plain English without jargon, and explaining, why your research is important and why it's exciting. Okay, the other thing is, if you blog about your research, it's more likely, it's another way. Increasingly, scientists have this expectation on them to share their science and to engage with the public. And if you write blog posts, that are aimed at the public and that make it digestible and understandable, then it's more likely, to get picked up by the mainstream media and so on. I don't know if you're on Twitter, that kind of thing, but rather than, when you have an exciting new study come out, rather than just tweeting a link to your academic paper or what have you, if you can also tweet a link to a blog post that you have written that explains why you're so excited about the findings and, the real-world impact, then that's all going to help increase your impact as an academic. I know, because I'm in journalism now, I know that journalists, they will spend a lot of time, looking at the Twitter feeds of scientists and so on, looking out for, the latest exciting research and scoops and that kind of thing, which the place to go for that increasingly is social media and blogs and so on. You might be wondering, where can you blog? Well, there are, obviously anyone can just set up a blog these days. That's one way to do it. You can set up a WordPress or a Blogspot account. That's going to be harder, obviously, to reach an audience, but you can start practicing that way. There are also these days, something that's changed since I started blogging. Is in a way, kind of blogging's gone more mainstream. It used to be more like a less conventional thing to do, like more fringe, more quirky. But the big media outlets have realized the success of blogs and how popular they are. So actually that distinction between kind of blogging and mainstream media has fallen away a little bit. And you'll see, like on the BBC, for example, some of their top correspondents, will actually write blogs on the BBC website, for example, and it's the same at the Guardian and elsewhere. So in a way, when I'm talking about blogging now, in a way, it's writing online about your research. And sites have been springing up over the last few years that give the opportunity for academics to do this. One of the most impressive is called The Conversation. You may have heard about it. They regularly publish kind of blog-style articles by academics about their own research. There are also kind of like group blogs in different areas. So in the area of mental health, there's this you may have heard of it, called the Mental Elf. They have like dozens of contributors on there. Obviously, piggybacking on to an established popular blog like that is going to kind of turbocharge your reach rather than doing it purely on your own. I know increasingly there are like groups of academics in different places forming their own little group blogs. This is a neuroscience themed blog. I think it's in the States, called Knowing Neurons, which is very popular. Some academics have kind of gone out on their own. They've become almost like their own brand. So you may have heard of Neuroskeptic. He started, right back in the day of like in the days of when MindHacks started, and he's actually I shouldn't say because he's supposed to be completely. I should say he or she, because this is a completely pseudonymous blogger, but they are a academic and regularly blogs about not just his own research, but research that is in the news and so on, and has become almost like an institution. Journalists writing neuroscience stories might even go and have a look at Neuroskeptic's blog to see what his take was on a particular news story. To get like a really good idea of all the different kind of blogs out there, you could try going to Science Seeker, which is a website that kind of collates all like dozens and dozens and dozens of different blogs all over the world by scientists and science writers. This is just their latest kind of roundup. I mean, you can see there are loads up there. I mean, I think there are hundreds on there that they kind of collate. So if you wanted to see how other people are doing it. Blogging offers a way for you to raise your digital profile as well, because increasingly our reputations are played out online. You have your social media followers. You have your metrics on things like ResearchGate and academia.edu, I think is another one. These kind of social media sites for academics. Obviously Twitter and so on. And your lab that you work for might also have its own kind of Twitter feed and so on. So increasingly, our kind of reputation, our status is online, and it is judged by the number of followers and the kind of splash that we can make online. Well, if you see yourself like that, if you think of your online reputation and your online brand in a way, any good brand needs content. If you write blog posts about your research and other research in your field, that gives you something to share. It gives you a way to contribute to the conversation, and it gives you something to tweet about rather than tweeting about what you had for breakfast. It's better, if you can tweet about, here's my new blog post on my new study, or this is what I think of. Do you remember, I think a couple of weeks ago, like there was headline news everywhere about that big antidepressant study. Everyone's talking about it. Well, if you have expertise in that area, if it overlaps with your area of study, you can make a valid, very, very useful contribution. People will want to hear your expert perspective, and you can do that with a blog post. In a way, Twitter is blogging as well. They call it micro-blogging. So even doing that, even going online, participating in that online conversation that is going on all the time these days, you will help raise your profile. You might, end up in interactions with eminent psychologists who are on Twitter, and Daryl, I know, is on Twitter, for example, and Steven Pinker, people like that. You don't know who you might end up in a chat with. Taking part, is what counts. Get your name out there. Let people know you've got an opinion, you've got expertise. You're engaged and excited. Similar thing. This is what I'm saying. There are big issues that our society worries about, and you can contribute with blogs. Again, so here's an example. On The Guardian has something called the Headquarters blog, and psychologists regularly contribute on there. So Natalia, I don't know how you pronounce her surname, Gerso is on the gender imbalance in science. Another thing that comes up in the news all the time, is video gaming addictive and bad for us and so on. And here, psychologists who research this area, this Andy, I won't try and say that. I know he's a key researcher in the field, and here he is writing on the Guardian's Headquarters blog, going beyond just academic scholarly debate, reaching out to the public and sharing his expertise. Also, you can use blogging to defend or clarify your research, because if you're lucky enough that your research captures the public imagination and it ends up in the media, you might find that it gets distorted. In some ways, the journalists might not cover, they might get the wrong end of the stick, or they might over-egg things. Well, there's a chance with a blog. It gives you, a voice to clarify things. This is an example of Molly Crockett doing this. She's an eminent neuroscience stroke psychology researcher. I think she's moved to the States now. So she did a study where they gave, they found that antidepressants and drugs for Parkinson's disease affected people's moral decisions. Then it got splashed all over the media that people diagnosed with depression or Parkinson's patients are potentially being, having their morals affected by the drugs they're taking, and she goes onto The Guardian and clarifies, no way, hold on, we were only testing healthy subjects. Our research doesn't show that, so she's kind of reining back, helping clarify what her research does and doesn't show. One lesson from the past is there's a right way and a wrong way to go about doing that. You don't want to go over the top, and I don't know, you might remember this from 2012. There was one of the studies that kind of kicked off, the replication crisis in psychology was a failure to replicate John Barr's classic study where exposure to old age-related words supposedly led people to leave the lab walking more slowly. I don't know if you remember, kind of classic social priming study. And it didn't replicate. Ed Yong, who had a blog at the time called Not Exactly Rocket Science, covered it. And John Barr, the eminent psychologist, wasn't happy. So he used his blog. At the time, he had a Psychology Today blog, which he used to hit back. But he got angry, he let his emotions get the better of him. He was very, very angry, vitriolic. And you can't actually get those blog posts anymore. He's deleted them from the record. I don't think he was proud of them with hindsight. And that's why Ed Yong here is reflecting on that, because he was targeted by John Barr kind of personally. So here he is saying, this is Ed Yong saying, whoa, steady on. So if you do, respond to your critics using blogging, don't be rash, remain civil, and make sure you don't make it personal. Another reason for blogging about your research, and this is kind of personal to me, because I went from doing a PhD and I've ended up in science communication, science writing and editing. And if that's, if you have leanings that way, if you think that might be what you would like to do, well, blogging is a great way, to lay the ground and practice. These are some characters who did just that. So Maria Konnikova is an incredible writer. She writes for The New Yorker, probably one of the most prestigious places to write for. She has written New York Times best-selling books. Well, she started off, I think she was doing her PhD. She was blogging for a website called Big Think. So she started off as a blogger. She's now, she's hit the big time. Mo Costandi, he did master's postgraduate, I think, in neuroscience. I don't think he finished. He started his PhD, didn't like it. He started blogging for The Guardian. He has now, he's a very successful science writer. He's got several books under his belt. Ed Yong, who I mentioned before, again, he was postgrad student. He was another postgrad student who I think didn't enjoy his PhD, and he got a job at Cancer Research UK. He was like a press officer type person, but he didn't find that very satisfying, and he started this blog called Not Exactly Rocket Science, which became an absolute phenomenon. I mean, hugely popular, and that's led, one thing has led to another, and he is now he's based in the UK still, but he's actually a staff writer, science writer for The Atlantic, another very prestigious publication, and he has written a best-selling book as well. So you can see there are these people who, when they're postgrad students, they realize they enjoy writing about science maybe more than doing it, and it's a great stepping stone towards a science writing career. And if that's the case, if that is what you enjoy doing, you think you might like to go down that path, then if you do start blogging, even if you set up your own personal blog, you might get noticed by commissioning editors. So this is a blog, a personal blog begun by an Oxford, I think Oxford or UCL even, I can't remember, postgrad student, and she created this kind of neuroscience-y blog, and I noticed people talking about it on Twitter and saying how good it was, and so I commissioned her to do a guest post for the Research Digest. So it's an example, I as an editor who commissions, I look out for, new budding writers, and one way to spot them is if they write their own blogs. So this is one of the blog posts that she wrote for us at the BPS Research Digest. There she is. Yeah, is University of Oxford, Sophia Delaniv. Now, I should say, if you do go embrace the world of blogging, and it can be, like I say, incredibly exciting. It's intoxicating, especially if you write a popular post that reaches hundreds of thousands of people, and you get comments flooding in. It can be exciting, but obviously with that go the perils. The larger your audience, you can get some backlash, and you've probably heard that people online tend to behave very differently for some reason than they do face-to-face. They tend to be more vitriolic, and I've experienced this myself. So if you are thin-skinned, like me, I find it difficult. I don't like it when people are being nasty online, but that's what you might find. So, for example, I wrote this blog post on goalkeepers, and someone says, this article is retarded. If you get a lot of this at once, it can start to get you down. This is another study I covered. Someone comments, what a moronic logic-free article. It's like, thanks. Like, can you be a bit more civil, please? I wrote this piece, which has been one of our most successful articles on Research Digest about counterintuitive findings. I was really pleased with it and the reaction. And then someone comes along and says, yes, it's true, sometimes psychology is counterintuitive, but don't throw common sense out the window for this sort of sensationalist science journalism. Someone else says, yes, a sensible response to an idiotic report. This is just clickbait. But then Richard Bailey, whoever he is, I don't know who he is, but he's one of my friends now, even though we've never met, he says, how to completely misunderstand and misrepresent a fun little article, which I agree is true. This is an example of, be careful what you wish for. So I wrote this for Psychology Today. I wrote a Brain Myths blog for Psychology Today. This kind of skeptical look at neurofeedback therapy back in 2013. Okay, it had over 300 comments. Well, this is 5 years ago. I still get bitter emails to this day from neurofeedback therapists. They very, very upset about this, and you know, and some quite personal, nasty messages and things. It's had, you know, it's made a big splash, and I realized why, because if you Google neurofeedback therapy, unfortunately for neurofeedback therapists, my blog post comes out on top, so it's not really a surprise. But I mean, I try in the blog post to be fair. You know, I explain that I'm taking a skeptical look and so on. But so be careful what you wish for. Obviously, it's exciting to reach these audiences, but you have to take responsibility too if you start affecting public opinion or reaching large audiences in this way. I don't recommend taking this approach to Twitter trolls, although I think it's sometimes tempting. And I just want to finish with a little story about another kind of word of caution. Because like, once it's out there, what you write on the internet, obviously once it's out there, it's out there. You can't control anymore what people do with it. I show you what I mean. I have told this story a few times before, so I'm sorry if anyone's heard this before. And this is the end of, this is the last bit of my talk. So this is 2011, a study I covered for BPS Research Digest, and it's about how the music we're listening to, it's by Adrian North, this study. It's a very clever study. The music we're listening to affects the taste of wine that we're drinking. So they had different conditions. They had people drink wine with these different types of music, things like this from Tchaikovsky and so on. And I'm a real ignoramus when it comes to classical music, and actually, as it happens, when it comes to wine as well. I'm not a connoisseur. And it was a bit of a throwaway line, but I basically... So they found that people thought that the wine tasted according to the music that they were listening to. And so I kind of wrote this throwaway line in my post, and I said, if you want your Merlot to taste earthy and full-bodied, try savoring it to the tune of Tom Jones, and to add a little zing to your Pinot, perhaps try some Gaga. It was just, you know, I was just being a bit silly, trying to extrapolate from the actual wine. I think they used Chilean red wine in the study. I was just trying to kind of extrapolate for ignoramuses like myself, how it might affect you in real life. But there was no Tom Jones or Gaga or Pinot or Merlot in the research, but nonetheless, next thing I know, Daily Mail headline, "Why listening to Tom Jones could enhance your enjoyment of wine." I'm like, oh no. And it was not just the tabloids either. It was the broadsheets got in on the act, and they added pictures. And I'm like, oh no, Tom Jones wasn't even in the study, and so on. And then it went international as well, Hindustan Times. And this is something you have to bear in mind as well, because if you do start blogging and you start reaching big audiences, something you have to negotiate is obviously you might be taken as a representative of your university or what have you, even if you're writing in a personal capacity, something you need to be a bit careful about. And that kind of happened here, you know, because even though on the Research Digest blog it says everything that's on there is kind of not official BPS, it's attributed to the authors of the blog posts. You know, nonetheless, you know, this Hindustan Times article says, you know, this is the British Psychological Society telling you to listen to Lady Gaga. Anyway, that's, I'm happy to answer questions if there's any time left. This is the BPS Research Digest Twitter, and that's my own one at the top. And thanks for listening.